Why ignoring people makes you irresistible. Seriously, try it. We live in a world that screams for attention. Notifications light up our screens, algorithms compete for our time, and everyone seems to be performing for the gaze of others. Social media has turned life into a stage, and we've all become actors in a drama we never auditioned for. But what if I told you the most powerful move you can make is to stop playing? What if the secret to becoming magnetic, to cultivating deep respect and authentic influence, is not in being louder, funnier, or more impressive, but in the art of ignoring? That sounds counterintuitive, right? We've been trained to believe that attention equals value, that the more visible we are, the more relevant we become. But here's the brutal philosophical truth. The more you chase people's attention, the more you weaken your presence. Because your energy becomes scattered, reactive, and dependent. You become a mirror, reflecting whatever others throw at you. But when you step back, when you ignore what isn't aligned, when you stop reacting, you create space. And in that space, something strange happens. People start leaning toward you. Why? Because your indifference becomes a kind of gravitational force. Your silence becomes louder than noise. Your unavailability becomes irresistible.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now, this isn't about arrogance or manipulation. This isn't about playing games or pretending not to care. This is about something deeper, detachment from the need to be seen. And that detachment, philosophically, is freedom. Because the moment you stop performing for others, you return to yourself. You stop being driven by external validation and begin operating from inner clarity. And ironically, that's when people start paying attention. Not because you're trying to impress them, but because you're grounded in something they can feel but can't quite explain. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you were truly drawn to someone who was desperate for your attention? Probably never. But think about the people who radiate calm, who aren't trying to prove anything, who seem perfectly fine with or without your approval. They have a kind of aura, don't they? That aura is born from self-possession, from not chasing, from ignoring what doesn't deserve their energy. And that's not just charisma, it's philosophical power in motion. It's the embodiment of a principle that goes back to the Stoics, to Eastern sages, to mystics. Withdraw your energy from what drains you, and you become radiant without effort. But how do we apply this in real life? It starts with observing where you leak your energy. Who are you constantly trying to impress? Whose opinion do you fear? Who triggers your need to explain, defend, or justify? Those are the people you need to learn to ignore, not with hatred, but with grace. Not avoidance, but neutrality. Because the more you ignore what distracts you, the more focus you reclaim. And focus is magnetic. People are drawn to those who know where they're going and don't need applause to keep walking. There's also a deep psychological layer to this. When you stop responding to every social cue, every emotional hook, every subtle jab, people start to wonder what's going on inside you. Your silence creates mystery. Your refusal to react creates power. And that power doesn't come from dominance, it comes from restraint. From choosing what's worthy of your attention and what isn't. Because let's face it, not everything or everyone deserves access to your energy. When you treat your attention as sacred, others start to treat it that way too. Now, here's the philosophical wow moment. What you ignore reveals what you value. If you ignore gossip, you value integrity. If you ignore chaos, you value peace. If you ignore superficial praise, you value authenticity. You teach the world how to treat you by what you refuse to engage with. And slowly your life becomes a reflection of your values, not your fears. So ask yourself, what if ignoring others isn't rejection but a radical act of self-respect? What if the path to becoming irresistible has nothing to do with being seen and everything to do with being centered? What if the people you're trying to impress are actually distracting you from the person you're meant to become? When you start ignoring what doesn't matter, what does matter starts to find you. And that's not magic, that's alignment. That's clarity. That's you stepping out of the performance and into your power. And when you do, people notice not because you're chasing their attention, but because you've become someone worth watching. The paradox of presence, why detachment makes you magnetic. There's something profoundly paradoxical about the way human attraction works, whether it's romantic, social, or even spiritual. The people we're most drawn to are often not the ones who try hardest to be noticed, but the ones who seem least concerned with being seen. Their presence is undeniable, yet they're not actively seeking attention. They're not loud, but they're felt. They're not always available, but they're remembered. Why is that? It's because true presence isn't about being everywhere, it's about being deeply somewhere, even if that somewhere is simply within yourself. And this is where detachment becomes magnetic. Wayne Dyer once said, "Detach yourself from the outcome and the universe will surprise you." That's not just spiritual poetry, it's psychological power. Because the moment you detach, you stop broadcasting neediness. You stop emitting that subtle but unmistakable signal that says, "I need you to validate me." And once that signal disappears, people can finally see you clearly, not as a performer, not as someone seeking their approval, but as someone who stands on their own. And that kind of presence is rare. It commands attention because it doesn't ask for it. Let's look deeper into what detachment really is. It's not that you stop caring. It's that you stop clinging. You stop depending on someone's reaction to determine your next move. You stop needing every interaction to go a certain way in order to feel okay. You begin to realize that your peace is not up for negotiation. And when people sense that you won't be emotionally shaken by their approval or rejection, they become more intrigued. Because most people are used to being chased, flattered, or feared. But when they meet someone who simply is, without needing anything in return, it disorients them in the best way. They start to wonder, what do you know that I don't? That's the paradox of presence. The less you try to be seen, the more visible you become. Why? Because detachment creates space. And space is magnetic. It invites curiosity. It makes people lean in. But here's the catch, you don't do it to get attention. That would just be another performance. You do it because you found something more valuable than attention, self-possession. You found that your worth doesn't rise or fall based on who texts back, who compliments you, who invites you, or who doesn't. You found that being centered in yourself is more powerful than any external validation. Think about it. Have you ever been around someone who just wasn't trying? Not apathetic, not cold, just at peace. They weren't trying to impress you, weren't trying to be liked, weren't trying to win you over. And yet, you couldn't stop thinking about them. That's not an accident. That's the result of someone who has cultivated detachment not as a game, but as a philosophy. They've stopped outsourcing their identity, and in doing so, they become a lighthouse in a world full of noise. So here's a question for you. What would your presence feel like if you no longer needed anything from anyone? Not in a bitter or disconnected way, but from a place of fullness. Would you speak differently? Walk differently? Show up differently? The answer is yes, because you'd no longer be performing. You'd be expressing. You'd no longer be chasing. You'd be attracting, not with tactics, but with truth. Detachment isn't about pushing people away. It's about pulling yourself inward so that when you do connect, it's from a place of strength, not scarcity. And when you live from that space, you become a rare kind of person. Not because you're trying to be rare, but because so few people have the courage to stop needing to be needed. And that courage is what makes you unforgettable. Emotional minimalism, how giving less makes people feel more in a world obsessed with intensity, louder voices, bigger displays, more dramatic emotions. We've forgotten a simple truth: less is often more, especially when it comes to our emotional energy. We think if we give more, feel more, express more, we'll be understood, appreciated, and loved more. But what actually happens? We overwhelm. We overextend. We exhaust ourselves and dilute our presence. And the people we're trying to connect with, they start tuning out. Not because they don't care, but because we've given them no space to feel us. This is where the philosophy of emotional minimalism steps in. And it's deeply countercultural. Emotional minimalism is the art of giving less, not out of coldness, but out of clarity. It's understanding that your energy is sacred and that not every emotion deserves expression, not every thought deserves sharing, and not every moment requires your full emotional investment. It's about being selective, not performative. And oddly enough, this restraint doesn't make you distant. It makes you magnetic, because when you stop flooding people with emotion, your energy starts to carry weight. They feel what isn't said. They sense everything you're not giving, and that subtlety creates resonance. There's a kind of power and mystery. When you don't immediately react, when you don't explain yourself obsessively, when you don't show all your emotional cards on the table, but you invite people into a deeper kind of awareness. You make them feel more by saying less. It echoes the ancient philosophical idea that silence is not the absence of communication, it's the highest form of it. When you speak less, your words matter more. When you emote less, your feelings hit harder. Because now, you're not just dumping emotion, you're channeling it with precision. But this isn't about manipulation. It's not about withholding to control others. It's about alignment. Emotional minimalism requires that you first become attuned to yourself. What do you feel that actually needs expression? What are you sharing because it's true? And what are you sharing because you want validation, sympathy, or attention? When you begin to clear out the clutter of unnecessary emotion, something magical happens. People begin to feel your essence, not just your noise. And that essence is what people truly crave. Oh, not your drama, not your oversharing, your presence. Let's be honest, how many times have we over-explained, over-apologized, or overreacted only to feel empty afterward? That's emotional excess. And just like physical clutter fills up a room and leaves no space to breathe, emotional clutter fills up a relationship and leaves no room for intimacy. The emotional minimalism is like opening a window. It lets fresh air in. It invites depth. It allows your presence to be felt, not just heard. So here's the practical piece. Start giving less where it doesn't matter, so you can give more where it does. Don't respond to every message instantly. Don't share every thought you have. Don't pour your heart into people who haven't earned access to it. Instead, observe, feel, choose. When you give your emotional energy intentionally, people begin to lean in. They start wondering what's behind your calm. They listen more carefully when you do speak. They value your attention because it's no longer something you throw around, it's something you honor. And here's the deep philosophical payoff. When you practice emotional minimalism, you begin to feel more internally expansive. You're no longer thrown around by every emotional wave. You become still, clear, present, and in that space your relationships evolve. You start attracting people who value silence, who respect boundaries, who want presence, not performance. And you stop feeling drained because you're no longer giving your energy away like it's disposable. Ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped trying to be emotionally understood and instead focused on being energetically aligned? What if the most powerful thing you could offer someone wasn't your emotional intensity, but your grounded stillness? That's the essence of emotional minimalism. That's how giving less makes people feel so much more. The silent revolution, how reclaiming your energy changes everything. There is a quiet revolution happening, not in the streets, not on social media, but inside people, maybe even inside you. It's the revolution of energy reclamation. The subtle but radical act of no longer giving your power away to every opinion, every distraction, every emotional tug of war. It's the shift from being reactive to being intentional. And it begins the moment you decide, I don't owe everyone my attention. I don't owe everyone my energy. That realization is not selfish, it's sacred. Because when you reclaim your energy, you reclaim your life. You start to realize how much of your day is dictated not by your own values, but by the pull of other people's needs, expectations, and drama. You say yes when you mean no. You reply when you want silence. You absorb moods that don't belong to you. And by the end of the day, you feel drained, but not because you did too much. It's because you gave too much of yourself away. The silent revolution begins when you interrupt that pattern, when you stop outsourcing your peace. Reclaiming your energy doesn't mean cutting everyone off or becoming cold. It means becoming sovereign. It means asking yourself, is this worth my energy? Before every interaction. It means allowing yourself to pause before you reply, to breathe before you react, to observe before you engage. And in that pause, you find power. Not the kind that dominates others, but the kind that centers you. That's the kind of power that reshapes your presence. When you become selective with your energy, people notice. Not because you're trying to make a statement, but because your presence now carries weight. You're not everywhere. You're not available for everything. And that makes you valuable. In a world where everyone is shouting, the one who chooses silence becomes magnetic. In a world of noise, boundaries are revolutionary. And in a world of overexposure, mystery is irresistible. But the deepest transformation is internal. As you pull your energy back from where it doesn't belong, you begin to reconnect with your own rhythm. You start hearing yourself again. You make decisions from a place of clarity, not pressure. You show up for others from fullness, not obligation. And everything changes: your relationships, your creativity, your peace. Because now, you're no longer running on empty. You're living from overflow. So here's the final, powerful question. What could your life become if you stopped scattering your energy and started honoring it? What if your silence wasn't absence, but presence? What if your detachment wasn't coldness, but wisdom? What if your refusal to engage with every distraction was the most loving thing you could do for yourself and for the world? That's the silent revolution, and it doesn't need noise to be felt. Because the moment you reclaim your energy, you stop chasing and start drawing everything in. Not by force, not by strategy, but by becoming the kind of person who no longer needs attention to be powerful, because they've already found their power within.